Adam Kinzinger is a former Republican congressman. He was a member of January 6th committee. Welcome to the program, Congressman Kinzinger.
It's great to be back with you. Thank you.
I would like to start with the latest developments in the U.S. general election. Kamala Harris is expected to be the Democratic nominee during the presidential elections, the general election. From your perspective, does she have a chance to beat Donald Trump?
Yeah, and I think every day that goes by, it appears that she has a better chance. So, there's still a significant amount of time till the election. I expect that this momentum she's feeling will slow down some because right now it's kind of there's just like an excitement people have to have somebody new in the race because we were faced with a rematch. And so I expect some of that will slow down, but she's certainly giving Donald Trump a run for his money. And I think if I was a betting man, I don't know which side I would bet on because I think it's about 50-50. And I think as she turns out good crowds to rallies and as she gins up or spins up some excitement, I think there's a pretty solid chance she defeats Donald Trump, which would be quite amazing.
Bloomberg reported that Kamala Harris have a small lead in the swing states. What is your take on the recent polls regarding the general election?
Well, they've shown a lot of momentum for Kamala Harris. So if you remember before she got in the race, when it was still Joe Biden in the race, his numbers were dropping. And all of the swing states showed Donald Trump in the lead, even the national polls, which really the national polls don't matter, but they kind of give you a sense of where the race is. Obviously, since everything is state by state, that was not working in Joe Biden's favor. So what we've seen is this pretty drastic shift, both with Kamala Harris now being in the race and with JD Vance as the vice presidential candidate for the Republicans, who is not very popular. This is a tight race. And, Pennsylvania is still very important. The last poll I saw showed Donald Trump slightly ahead in Pennsylvania, but it showed Harris ahead in almost every other swing state. So this is, again, there's a lot of time between now and Election Day, but it certainly feels like there's a much better chance that Donald Trump won't be president again than there was about a month ago.
You have previously endorsed President Biden. Do you endorse Kamala Harris?
I will. I haven't yet. It's more of a matter of timing and when that wants to be rolled out, when we want to roll that out. But yeah, I would pretty much vote for anybody short of actual Satan himself before Donald Trump. So I don't think it'll be much of a hard decision for me to go with Kamala Harris.
I will also cover this decision-making process regarding the Biden's dropout of this race. Do you see this decision as a delayed one or a timely one?
Look, I think he shouldn't have run again. I mean, there was a lot of concern that, and I don't think like Joe Biden doesn't have the ability to be president now. I think he does. But it's obvious that Father Time is catching up with him and he's getting older, and his ability to as a candidate for president, your most important job is to defeat the other guy. And what we saw in the debate was Joe Biden was unable to put forward a compelling reason to defeat Donald Trump. And there's so many compelling reasons. So I think the decision was delayed. But that said, it's kind of working out in the Democrats' favor. There's this excitement coming over to Kamala because there's somebody new in the race. And she's got just a short amount of time to make the case. So I think when we look back on this, it may have been the right timing, but I certainly wish that Joe Biden, who's been a good president, I don't agree with all his stuff, but he's been a decent president. I don't think he should have had to go out this way.
If there wasn't any pressure on Biden to drop out, would he continue his campaign?
I think he would have continued his campaign. And this shows the difference between a healthy political party and an unhealthy political party. A healthy political party, like the Democrats, where people feel like they can speak out and say what everybody else is seeing, which is Joe Biden is not able to continue this case against Donald Trump, versus the Republican Party, who, when people like me speak out against Donald Trump, we get kicked out of the party, basically. and people don't feel the freedom to speak out against their leader. Well, that's not a healthy political party. So, yeah, I think the pressure is the reason Joe Biden backed down, but it's also very important to recognize that is a healthy sign of a party in a democracy when people in that party feel like they can have a voice, have a say, even if it looks messy to somebody from the outside.
Is there a chance for the Republican Party to change its structure, to change its nature, and to get back to this Republican Party which was in the past?
Which we all remember and which we all loved, and which is the reason I joined the Republican Party, because I remember Ronald Reagan. I was 10 years old when he told Gorbachev to tear down this wall. You know, I remember what a strong America standing up against the communists in the Soviet Union. I remember what that represented. And it's sad to see this party has lost its way, you know? And so I think, yes, there's a really good chance the Republican Party kind of returns to what we remember of it, but I don't think it's going to be soon. I think the Republican Party has got to lose and lose big in November. I think they have to see that Donald Trump is not the future, and that isolationism is not the future, and anger and division is not the future. And if they see that and wake up, they can be the party that you and I remember that stood for freedom and opportunity around the globe.
How do you see the chances for Republicans and Democrats during the general election and elections to the House and Senate after the Kamala Harris beginning of his campaign, after she started his campaign and she would be a Democratic nominee?
Well, there's no doubt that, again, the Democrats are in a better position, even in the House and Senate, than they would have been, a month ago. I think it's quite likely, since the margins in the U.S. House are so tight, it's very likely that the Democrats can win the House back. Although in the last 30 years, the Democrats, when they win the House back, they usually only hold it for 2 or 4 years. It's kind of strange. But I think there's a good shot at that, because I don't think the Republican brand is especially strong right now. JD Vance hasn't helped things. I think JD Vance's stance on Ukraine hasn't helped things, honestly, and it's confusing to a lot of people. On the Senate side, this is where I worry a little bit, because there are a lot more what I would call Republican or Democratic senators that are in Republican states that are up for re-election now. And so it's going to be much harder for the Democrats to hold the majority in the Senate, but it's still possible. So I think, what we've seen in a lot of these states, if you look at like Wisconsin, or you look at some of those like Arizona, you see that the Democratic candidate for Senate was outpacing, doing better than Joe Biden. And so that showed that Joe Biden was actually a drag on these people on that ticket. Now you're starting to see Kamala Harris match these Senate candidates. So that's showing that there is actual real momentum for the Democrats. But if they can hold the Senate, that'll be huge. I'm not sure that's possible, but I think it's quite possible they win the House.
I would like also to cover Trump's campaign, and previously you mentioned about the JD Vance. Why did Trump choose such a weak candidate? And do you see this decision as a Trump's mistake?
I think it was a huge mistake. Trump is just not that smart. I mean, I think we all people like to see Donald Trump and think he's this genius that's making these plans. He's really not. He's a guy that makes decision based on emotion. He's not a deep thinker. And I think that's what you have with JD Vance. I think there's rumors that his kids were trying to talk him into JD Vance. And obviously JD Vance is young and good looking, which is something that Donald Trump strangely cares about. And so I think he made that decision when Joe Biden was in the race, because he was pretty confident he was going to win. Well, there's a lot that JD Vance has said that is not going to work well for Donald Trump, including against women, including talking about childless cat ladies running this country, which I got to tell you, they're not running the country. And so I think Donald Trump is regretting that pick today. I think there's a very small chance, not a big chance, a very small chance that he still replaces JD Vance on the ticket. He can do that for another few weeks. But there's no doubt that JD Vance has been a drag on Donald Trump, which I'm sure does not make Donald Trump very happy.
Don't you think that this decision of Trump to take to nominee JD Vance was an intentional one, just to have a candidate which cannot overwhelm you during the campaign and during the work in the White House? What is your take on that?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, look, JD Vance is a very strong personality because he wrote a book. He was famous in his own right. But what the reality, the key to being Donald Trump's vice president, and it's the strangest thing because it was never like this historically, is you have to show that you are willing to do absolutely anything for Donald Trump. You're willing to, take a bullet in a proverbial way. You're willing to play second fiddle to Donald Trump. And JD Vance spent the last year basically trying to prove his loyalty to Donald Trump. So I think that's part of the reason. And but the one thing Donald Trump obviously didn't do is he didn't do great research into what JD Vance has said, including on Tucker Carlson's show. And that's hurting him. It's funny because, typically when a candidate picks a vice president, they have a committee that does deep research and finds out all about your background because they don't want to be surprised by anything. Donald Trump always said, I just use my gut instinct to pick a vice president. Well, he did in this case, and I don't think it's working out very well for him. And that makes me happy.
That could make us happy too, but I would like also to cover foreign policy scenarios. I'm confident that you have heard Trump's plans, possible Trump plans on the war in Ukraine. There have been some speculations on to use Ukraine's membership in NATO as a bargaining chip, or to cede some territories to Russia, to organize a ceasefire on any kind of terms. What do you think about Trump's initiatives to end the war in Ukraine? And do you believe that anything could work, any plan, any Trump's plan could work in Ukraine?
Look, I think Donald Trump has no clue how foreign policy works. I mean, this is just obvious. He would go and kiss up to Kim Jong-un in North Korea, saluting a North Korean general. He talked about his great affection for Vladimir Putin and Xi. Obviously, this is a guy that is more enamored by men that appear strong, which is creepy to me, than he is by, a country which shares our values. So, look, I think let's take the worst case scenario. If Donald Trump wins, I don't think it's game over for Ukraine. I don't think Ukraine is, I don't think Donald Trump's going to just cut Ukraine off and toss him over to the Russians and say, do what you want. But I think he believes that he has the ability to somehow use his great skills to convince Vladimir Putin and Ukraine to accept a deal. And I think that deal would be probably pretty bad. I mean, if Ukraine decides that they want to give territory for peace, that's Ukraine's decision. That's not the United States or anybody else's decision to bargain with Ukrainian territory. Only Ukraine can do that. That is Ukraine's assets. And from what I understand, Ukraine has made a decision to keep fighting, to liberate their people, to defend their territory, to actually stop Russian aggression once and for all, and not just delay it for another decade until the Russian army is rebuilt. And that's Ukraine's decision. And we need to be here to support Ukraine every step of the way until the war is won. And I think Donald Trump's idea of peace simply won't work. I think he's naive to think it will. And I think it'll only embolden Vladimir Putin to basically stay in the fight until he gets to see what he can extract from Donald Trump.
What do you expect from the foreign policy from the Kamala Harris administration in case of her presidency? Do you expect any more aggressive approach and less cautiousness?
Well, I hope so. Look, I think Joe Biden has done an okay job on Ukraine. I think he certainly has, given a lot of weapons and certainly has pushed through a lot of spending from the U.S. to help Ukraine, and certainly has said the right things. But there's been a lot of caution and too much caution. Why is it that we don't have F-16s yet over the skies in large numbers? Why is it that the U.S. should be training young men just out of college and in flight training here, so that we're not taking pilots off the front lines, but we're spinning up brand new pilots to go and fly the F-16 or fly MiGs. That's what we ought to be doing. And we ought to allow Ukraine to fire American weapons at any legitimate Russian target, even in Russian territory. I hope Kamala Harris does that. And I think she will certainly want to appear to be strong on foreign policy. I think you will not see with Kamala Harris a president with a worse Ukraine policy than Joe Biden. It's quite possible you would see one with a better policy. One of the things I try to stress here all the time is, and I know this frustrates Ukraine, it frustrates me, is this idea that we can't let Ukraine do something because it's escalatory. And then just a few months later, we realize Ukraine has to do it. And by then it's almost too late. So it's time to take the handcuffs off Ukraine, give them the weapons they need. Certainly, Ukraine is not interested in attacking civilian buildings in Russia with American weapons, but there are a lot of legitimate Russian targets that need to be destroyed in order to end this war.
Is there enough political will among the members of Democratic Party to allow Ukraine to strike inside Russia with long-range weapons? Do you see that this momentum is here, that this is right time to do so, and Democrats can do this in this time right now?
Yeah, I certainly believe there's enough will. And I think even in the Republican Party, outside of Donald Trump and JD Vance and some of the weirdos in the GOP, for the most part, as you see in these votes, a good at least still half of the Republican Party is all about taking the handcuffs off of Ukraine and all about a Ukrainian one-sided victory. And so I think there's enough will there right now. And in fact, look, I mean, just the recent allowing of Ukraine to fire within what we call near Russia, which is a dumb statement. I would call all of Russia near Russia. But, I think if you look at the pressure that came on the administration to say, look, Ukraine has to blow up stuff that's sitting in Russia ready to attack. And the administration said, okay. They respond very well to pressure. And by the way, everything from Patriot missiles to Abrams tanks to Bradley tanks to HIMARS to ATACMS, everything was feared to be the beginning of World War III, and none of it was the beginning of World War III. Let's be clear, Russia is the one that is not interested in starting World War III because they would last about 3 days against NATO in any kind of an open aggression. So it's time to call Russia's bluff and give Ukraine what they need to win.
Also, the New York Times reported that U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin warned Ukraine against a secret covert operation inside Russia. New York Times reported that that's all because of the phone call between Lloyd Austin and Russia's Defense Ministry, Andrei Belousov. What is your opinion on that, and do you think that there are lots of such warnings from the United States?
I was hoping that wasn't true, and unfortunately it appears that it might be. Look, my view is this. I mean, Ukraine is fighting for its life, and you don't get to launch a war against a country and then call somebody and say, please don't let them hurt me here at home. You don't get to do that. And I'm really disappointed that the United States did that. Having somebody call and tell on your sister, right, or whatever this is, and that the United States, I think if Russia was upset about it, we should have frankly doubled down and helped Ukraine in this operation. You don't get to launch a war and then call timeout when it comes to your home. And that's what bothers me. So yeah, it's a very disturbing thing to hear. It's similarly disturbing to when, we heard rumors of the U.S. trying to get Ukraine to stop attacking the oil production of Russia. I hope Ukraine doesn't listen and that Ukraine continues to prosecute this war however it sees fit to win.
There have been also initiatives to protect aid for Ukraine from Donald Trump. NATO leaders have agreed to establish a new command center in Germany, which would coordinate aid for Ukraine and providing Ukraine with additional weapons. Do you believe that these decisions can really protect aid for Ukraine, security assistance for Ukraine from Donald Trump?
I think it would be helpful. I mean, look, there's no doubt that, the one thing a senator in Germany can't do is force the U.S. If the U.S. decides to cut off aid, they can't obviously force it to happen. So there would be a certain lack of aid there. But yeah, I think it's important. It makes me sad as an American that it's a step that, Europe feels like they have to take. But at the same time, look, I think the other good thing about this is that it really is. And as much as I'm a defense hawk, and I believe that, the U.S. plays, frankly, the leading role in NATO and security around the globe, it is good and important to see Europe stepping up. Europe for a long time has just kind of rested and relied on the U.S. to keep them safe. I mean, you even look at what's certainly in Europe's backyard, the Balkans, and there's so many countries that just simply refuse to be involved in that. And that's literally as close as you can get to Europe. And so it's important to see Europe step up. But one of the best things we can do to protect the future aid and production capacity of Ukraine is to really invest in our domestic production capacity. The U.S. is doing this, and so there's been some positive movement here. But the rest of Europe has to continue to invest in their production of 155 ammunition, their production of barrels for artillery, the stuff that doesn't make a lot of money for companies, but is appearing to be very important in this war. That's what we have to do. We have to not just match Russia, but exceed Russia's ability to spin up their economy for war. And look, Europe is, between the United States and Europe, we're something like 20 or 30 times the size of Russia. So if we actually put our mind in the game, we could swallow them up in terms of military production. That's going to be the most important thing.
And my last question would be about Iran. Iran still continues to provide Russia with long-range drones. Treasury Department this week announced new sanctions against some companies which are involved in producing weapons in Iran and providing Russia with new drones. Do you think that this all stuff regarding sanctions is working properly right now? Because it seems like new sanctions are adopting, but drones are still going on to Russia regardless and despite of new sanctions package from the United States.
Well, look, if I got to give Russia credit for one thing, it's the ability to figure out a way around sanctions. I mean, they've done this by enlisting third countries to import stuff from the United States, and then they import from the third countries. They've obviously built a strong alliance between Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I got to tell you, honestly, if I was a country's leader and I had to rely on Iran and North Korea to fund my military, I would be ashamed and embarrassed. At least Ukraine has countries that aren't failing, like the United States and Europe, helping to support it. You guys are doing way better than Russia is. And so that would be there's no doubt that Russia has found a way around these sanctions. And so our Treasury Department, our sanctions regime has to get stronger. We have to make it clear to even allies that if they are helping to go around sanctions, there will be punishment for that. And I think it's important to look at places like India and say, look, you really want to have a relationship with the West to counter China. Well, guess what? You've got to do some things for us as well. And buying Russian oil and providing Russia with the things they need is not helping. So, but the reality is Russia's, going to continue to be evil and get its stuff from evil people. And we just have to be able to outproduce Russia. Ukraine's got to continue to find more people to fight the war, to have good patriots step up and do what every generation has been called on in the United States to do, which is to defend their country. And we've got to keep supplying them.
And also Russia continues to cooperate with North Korea. What is your take on their new defense treaty? Don't you think that Biden's cautious policy is the reason why Russia is demonstrating increasing cooperation, increasing defense cooperation between Russia and North Korea, and even signing this strong security pact, security deal that also have implications, have also norms about dual defense, some dual defense sentences. What is your take on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's certainly escalatory, and if you think back to the beginning of the war, one of the things the administration said is we can't give Ukraine HIMARS or ATAGMs because we're afraid that then Russia will turn to Iran for ballistic missiles. They already did. They just turned to, they've turned to Iran for ballistic missiles. Now what? And granted, we did supply Ukraine with longer range weapons, and the Biden administration should get credit for that. But I think how do we leverage what's going on between Russia and North Korea, for instance, is let's bring South Korea in. South Korea has a significant amount of ammunition available, probably equivalent to what the North has, and it's better quality because the North stuff, every, 100 rounds or so is going to blow up a barrel. The South is much better. And so I think continuing to build those defense relationships between South Korea and Ukraine as a proxy against what North Korea is doing is going to be important. And maybe in the long run, that works out better for Ukraine. But there's not much the U.S. can do. We're not going to bomb North Korea, obviously, as a result of this. But I think to continue to point out as well the fact that Russia has to rely on two of the worst regimes in the world, North Korea and Iran, to support it should be an embarrassment to Vladimir Putin. And I don't know how he looks at himself in the mirror, especially knowing what he's done to Ukrainian families and kidnapping children. But there's a special place in hell for him someday.
Thank you, Congressman Kinzinger, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.